Hi, I'm Ryan Chatterson, and during this session, we're going to go into the specifics of aquaponic tomato culture. Okay, a brief overview before we start going through the entire lesson. First off, we're going to start off with variety selection because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of types of tomato plants, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you select the proper variety for your maybe backyard or for your growing operation. Next, we're going to talk about growing techniques, the different growing techniques that we can use to grow tomatoes in our greenhouses or for home food production. We're going to get into the specific nutrient requirements of tomato plants. So maybe how does this differ from lettuces and some of the other smaller nutrient demanding crops that you commonly see grown in aquaponics, and what do tomatoes require so that we can obtain these commercial yields for your operation. Next, we're going to get into environmental requirements. How much airflow do we need? What's the sunlight requirements, etc. If we don't follow those, then you're going to get one part of the season where you get great growth out of tomatoes, and that's when they would naturally grow in your area. The rest of the year, you're not going to get good growth or any growth, depending on what those temperatures and conditions are. So we'll get into that. We're going to talk about insect and disease control specifically for tomato plants. We're going to get into grafting and rootstock selection, so a little bit of advanced techniques, horticultural techniques to improve your yields and help you to advance past your competition. We're going to talk about greenhouse pollination. So how do we make this happen in an enclosed environment, whether that's a greenhouse or a warehouse, whatever structure we're talking about. When we're not exposed to natural pollinators, we need to take that into account and make sure that we have complete pollination. And then we're going to get into the markets. So what market we're selling into and how that affects a lot of these choices that we're going to make. So we'll start off here with variety selection. And as you can see, tomatoes come in just about every shape and size you can think of. You get long cylindrical shaped tomatoes, short round tomatoes, large round tomatoes, heart-shaped tomatoes, oblong rib-shaped tomatoes, and all different colors of the rainbow. Okay, this was just one season. I wanted to give you guys a good idea of what you can do. And these are all heirloom variety of tomatoes that sell for a high dollar at a local marketplace. I can guarantee you haven't found most of these, maybe one of these varieties in your local grocery store. That's because for my operation at this scale, I really focus on varieties that you can't buy in a grocery store. Varieties that are going to catch somebody's attention and pull them towards me versus other areas where they could be buying tomatoes from. If you're the only guy with the product and it's a great product, then you can really set a higher selling price and make that a profitable product. And that's called finding your niche. So as far as plant types, we have two different types of tomato plants as far as how they're going to grow for us. First off is the indeterminate type of tomato plant, and this is what I recommend for all long-term grow-outs, for greenhouse grow-outs, or even outdoor grow-outs when you just make an overhead twine and trellis them outside. If you want a long season and to harvest throughout the season continually, an indeterminate type of tomato plant is what you're going to want to choose. So these are plants that grow continuously throughout the season as a vine. They yield fruit continuously from the first bloom until the plants die from old age, disease, weather, pests, etc. And in an indoor controlled environment like a greenhouse, it's very common commercially to see these vines grown from 12 to 24 months at a time. So you have nearly a 2-year-old tomato plant. By the time it gets so long, it just can't pull water from its root source through 200 feet of vine anymore. That's basically what causes these to finally die off. A determinate type of tomato plant is a plant that grows as more of a bush. They don't grow as a long singular vine. Of course, you could prune them to do that, but you'll see later it wouldn't make sense. So it's a bush form, and they stay to an average of 4 feet in height. They set all of their fruit at once, and it ripens at the same time. Then the plant dies. So they're going to set a massive amount of fruit when you allow this to form as a bush. And it's all going to ripen right around the same time, about within a week and a half of each other, the fruits. And this is really good if you actually want to can vegetables or process vegetables all at once. Well, it's a lot easier to do it if you get 500 pounds of tomatoes at one time than it is if you're getting 500 pounds of tomatoes stretched out over 4 months or something like that. Okay, so they do have their place, and most canning type situations or processing situations, you grow determinate plants so that you can batch harvest that. Again, for aquaponics, indeterminate makes a lot more sense too, because we don't have such a spike and rise in the nutrient requirements and then a drop off when you harvest that plant. This is going to be pretty steady, gradual rise in nutrient requirements, and it's just going to level off for the rest of the life of that plant. Tomato types. So we have heirloom varieties, we have hybrid varieties, we have greenhouse hybrids, we have small, medium, large size fruit, extremely large size fruit. You can get tomatoes over 5 pounds. So there's a lot of choices here. But it all comes down to your market. Okay, unless you're growing this for personal home use, it all comes down to your market. If you're doing home or family use, well, you're really only producing a small quantity. If you're doing farmers markets, you're doing small to medium quantity. That's about, how much you're actually producing if you actually want to make money. Restaurants, I'd consider that small to medium quantity production if you're directly marketing your produce to restaurants, because again, there's only so much time in the day, and of course you could expand that pretty far, but I'm still going to leave that in the small to medium category. If you go into Fresh Point Distribution, which is our largest national distribution chain in the country, a subsidiary of Cisco, it's a large quantity. You better be moving a large quantity of fruit if you're going to be moving it through a wholesale distributor. So local versus national distribution. You're not going to be distributing nationally if you're growing 1,000 pounds of tomatoes a year. It doesn't make sense. Maybe if you found, a niche restaurant across the country that wanted to pay a high dollar to fly them in overnight. But for all general purposes, you're going to be creating a vast amount of fruit if you're doing national distribution. International distribution, even more. You're looking at something like a large operation out in Arizona that does over 1 million pounds of tomatoes every 2 days. Okay, that's large scale, that's international, and they still have a really hard time staying in business because as you get large, economies of scale drop and they can drop the price cheaper. Well, so can everybody else and all the other countries in competition with you. And I'm sure in the U.S. labor plays a big key into that. So we want to first establish here how much we're going to produce, and that's kind of going to tell us which market we're going to need to start looking into marketing our product into. And from there, that tells us, well, hey, how much are we going to expect to get back from that product? You're going to get a lot more money direct marketing to a restaurant than you are selling to a wholesale national distributor. So it's kind of all connected, but it's a good place to start, is right here. So small to medium markets, heirlooms and greenhouse varieties bred to look like heirlooms work the best and demand a higher price. Okay, and this is how I'm going to lay it out for you. If you are working hand in hand with a chef, and this is, state-of-the-art, menu, these guys are highly trained chefs, and they need that perfect heirloom tomato with the exquisite taste. Well, you go with heirloom tomatoes and they're going to pay for what it costs. They will no doubt pay for that product. sometimes you're going to run into chain restaurants, even smaller chain restaurants, that you can get your foot in the door. They want heirloom type tomatoes, but they're never going to pay the price that it actually takes to create an heirloom tomato. And for those type of customers, we have heirloom lookalikes. Okay, they're beautiful purple tomatoes, ribbed red tomatoes. They're bred to look like heirlooms that everybody has grown to love, but they are big producers in the greenhouse, and they're not those varieties. They're not the heirlooms. They're bred to look like them. The taste and some of those other olfactory senses may not be there with those tomatoes. Okay? Medium to large scale operations, hybrids are usually going to be a better choice unless you can market and distribute heirloom tomatoes in large quantities for premium prices. And there are farms out there that do this, okay? There are, I'm always reading farming news. There are a couple up in Pennsylvania. They have 200 acres of heirloom tomatoes. They sell heirloom tomatoes to a lot of local markets, restaurants, etc. And then they have a whole processing factory where they process heirloom tomatoes into different products. And they're making a lot of money. They're doing really good. Now, this isn't aquaponics, but this is just to say you can do large scale, 150 acres of tomatoes. Let me tell you, that's a lot of tomatoes, okay? So that is possible to jump into that realm, but for the most part, you're going to grocery stores, you're going to some of those other, resellers and national chains. You're going to want the normal red round tomato, the normal plum tomato, things like that, Roma tomato, things that people are used to seeing in a grocery store and that are always there, the on the vine tomatoes, things like that. Well, those are the varieties you're going to grow because that's what the grocery stores are going to want to buy from you. So a lot of times when you're making deals on these larger ends, they'll tell you the variety to grow. You're not going to throw out, I want the Mountain Mist variety. They're gonna shut you down and say, hey, we want Big Boy, or we want the BR552, and they're going to tell you the variety to grow, okay? That's on a larger scale. A little bit of nutritional information. So if you're selling tomatoes, a lot of people are going to come up and ask you questions about those tomatoes, and you need to be educated. You don't want to be the dumb guy that just says, I don't know, I just put them in the ground and pick them. You need to know everything about these. You need to look passionate about your product, and when you educate people, it leads to a sale. Very, very often leads to a sale. Now, at a market, even talking to restaurants, very often, I'll get a question, well, nutritionally, what's the difference between a purple tomato and, say, a red tomato? Or nutritionally, what does a yellow tomato offer me? And right here, I'm going to explain to you, and you can further explain that to your clients and educate them on the differences, the subtle differences between these tomato varieties and what they have to offer. Okay, so purple and black tomatoes are considered the most nutritious and the sweetest tomatoes. So they're going to test with the highest Brix level out of the other tomatoes, color tomatoes out there that we're offering, okay? They are constantly rated as best tasting in blind taste tests and among food aficionados. So constantly, black and dark purple varieties are rated as the best tasting tomatoes. They might not be the most appealing to the eye, but they are rated the best tasting. And when I say the most nutritious, if you look at a nutritional breakdown of a dark tomato, the potassium, calcium levels, vitamin A, vitamin C, other nutrition factors that we would look at are higher than the other tomatoes out there, and that's what I mean. And if you're really interested in that, by all means, let me know, and I believe I have an old article that shows a breakdown of some of these different nutrition concentrations within these different tomato colors. Okay, we'll move on to green tomatoes. So this is the same potassium and vitamin C as a red ripened tomato, but they're absent lycopene. They're great tasting and colorful additions to salads. So I grow a green zebra is one of the varieties that does great and sells great. It's a striped green tomato that kind of almost has like a watermelon look to it, and people love it. But it is absent of lycopene. So if somebody comes up and says, oh, I want to boost my lycopene in my diet and I can't wait to try your green tomatoes, you can stop them right there and say, well, hey, sorry, sir, pick one of the reds or the purple varieties because it's absent of lycopene. But you're getting great vitamin C and great boosted potassium levels into your diet. So, you know, explain it, not that it's bad, it doesn't have lycopene. It's great that it has potassium and vitamin C that are really healthy to maintain in your diet. And it's a good tasting tomato, okay? You're not lying, you're trying to bring out what the good qualities are in these fruits. Red and pink tomatoes are a major source of potassium, lycopene, vitamin A, vitamin C, along with several other nutrients and micronutrients. I can tell you right now, red tomatoes will outsell other tomatoes 3-to-1 at a farmer's market, okay? At least in the United States. I've been all over the US, I have a lot of clients all over the US. The problem is that we have been ingrained to think that tomatoes are supposed to be red. Same as the way we've been ingrained to think carrots are supposed to be orange, etc., etc., etc. Eggplants are supposed to be purple, they're really supposed to be white. That's why they were named eggplants. But they bruise and they get ugly when they're white. So the dark purple color hides some of that, and that's become a commercial standard. There's reasons behind all of this, but something to keep in mind is, remember, reds are going to outsell a lot of these other varieties. So if you're starting out, definitely include reds into your mix of what you're offering and start to adapt off of that first year. So your first year into the marketplace, dealing with restaurants, etc., grow a variety, grow, I'd say, at least half of your varieties red, and then monitor what's selling and adjust for the next year's crop. If you're selling out of red tomatoes every week and you've got orange and yellow tomatoes sitting there that you have to can or do something with, well, the next year, grow less of that type. Because again, this isn't what we like to grow. This is what the customer wants to purchase, unless it's for home food production, all right? Yellow and orange tomatoes are considered sweet tomatoes with lower acid concentrations than other colors. They have less lycopene, but similar levels of potassium and vitamin C as red ripe tomatoes. So what we sell these as is low acid tomatoes for people that have acid reflux from eating tomatoes or have other similar mouth irritations from eating tomatoes. I never heard of that growing up. I would feast on tomatoes, but selling, nearly 20,000 pounds of tomatoes over the past couple years, I've heard a lot of stories. And a lot of people are actually sensitive to the acidity of tomatoes. So if that's the case, and if you're offering a wide variety, definitely include some yellow tomatoes or orange, but I'd say yellow's even less acid. Include those into your mix, because you're almost always going to have somebody come by and say, oh, your tomatoes look wonderful, but I have a problem with the acid, so I can't eat them. Well, guess what? I have low acid tomatoes. Try one out. Let me know how it is. If you have a reaction, fine, don't come back. But if you don't, here's a wonderful choice that you can add into your diet and get, awesome nutrition from tomatoes, even though you have this problem. So it's not creative marketing, it's education. And if you know what the qualities are of these different types of tomatoes, it helps you to actually sell them. Sourcing seed, all right? Well, there are a lot of seed sources, especially if you're international customers. You're not going to be probably looking into the US at some of the seed sources that I'm using, but the main point is to get somebody a quality seed supplier. Don't get a ma and pa operation that harvested these out of their backyard. Buy somebody with a reputation that prints harvest dates of seed on the label of the packages, that tells you the percent germination of the seed, etc., etc., etc. You want information and you want to feel good about this crop, because tomatoes are a long-term risky crop, and the last thing you want to do is spend 3 to 6 months figuring out that this is maybe not what you ordered, or a failed crop, or several other situations where it wouldn't have happened if you got good seed to begin with. So start with good seed. Sometimes it costs a little bit more money. Good seed can cost 50 cents, 75 cents per seed, depending on some of these varieties. They can get really expensive. I've seen some over $1 a seed if you're buying at small quantities. But think how much money you're making from that one seed. It may cost you $1 for the seed, but if you're going to get 40 to 50 pounds of tomatoes and you're going to sell them at $5 to $8 a pound, you're making a heck of a lot of money, and it's easy to justify the $1 for the seed, okay? And good seeds are going to cost money. So here's some good seed sources, okay? Baker Creek heirloom seeds. If you want some really funky heirloom varieties from around the world that are going to set you apart, you definitely want to check out Baker Creek heirloom seeds. And not just for tomatoes, probably for any type of vegetable you can dream up. If you've never seen it, they send a catalog that's probably 3/4 of an inch thick, and it is beautiful. It's one of those things you just like to have on the shelf because it's such a nice production. And they have great seeds. So definitely, if you've never heard of them, check them out because they're kind of the heirloom standard. Johnny's Seeds is great. That's where I buy the majority of my seeds from. They have good customer service. They have good technicians there that can help you with seed selection or help you put together specific mixes of varieties, say if you're doing lettuces and stuff. But they have a good selection of tomato seeds, a really good selection. High Mowing Seeds is awesome. They are a little bit smaller than Johnny's, but they're a great place to order organic seeds from, okay? And they have technicians that are farmers on the phone that have grown these, and they can help you with variety choices depending on where you're located, what your market is, and what you're trying to achieve. So really great guys, definitely worth checking them out. Totally Tomatoes. Sounds a little wacky, but they've got a lot of different types of tomatoes there. So if you're into, hey, I want to see a couple hundred varieties of tomatoes, well, check out Totally Tomatoes because they've got a big variety there to choose from. And there are many others on the internet. There's Jung Seeds, there's Territorial Seeds, there's 100 other seed suppliers out there. But the number one thing, do your research on them. Don't just, oh, the seed popped up on this website, click order. Don't do that. Research the site a little bit. Find out, hey, did people actually get good germination out of the seeds that they ordered? And most of this stuff you could type right into Google. Johnny's Seeds, Cherokee Purple Tomato Plant. And you're going to get reviews from people. Hey, I ordered these and this did great, or hey, these didn't do anything for me. So do a little bit of research, and that's part of this new age of farming. Okay, that's part of what you're becoming. You're coming into. It's not just plant the stuff, listen to what Grandpa said, and cross your fingers for a good year. Okay, we can do more. And if you take those steps to do more, you're gonna make money. That's how I make money. I didn't just sit back and hope. I progressively worked through tomato varieties until I could find profit in that for my farm. And it's been great, okay? And you can do the same. So here's some personal favorites here that I've grown all in aquaponics. I'm not a big dirt guy, so anything that I recommend, you don't picture, oh, maybe he did this in the ground. No, this is all aquaponics. I'm not great in the dirt. I forget to water plants a lot, so that's why I moved to aquaponics. We'll go here and look. Cherokee Purple is a great variety. This is a high, heavy producer, has a little bit of a funky growth pattern on it for an indeterminate plant, where you may get a branch with a side branch that we would normally prune, and then it'll flower a cluster out of that axial branch. So definitely something to consider with heirloom varieties. I'm going to talk about pruning techniques and how we train these in a greenhouse or to an outdoor trellis system a little bit later. But heirlooms are wacky. They're not a standard exactly how it goes every time type of plant, okay? They almost all have something a little bit individual about them, and that's because an heirloom is a seed that's basically been unchanged over the years. Now they have new heirlooms that are crossbred from old heirlooms, but a lot of the traditional heirlooms, they're unchanged for hundreds of years. So they're a little bit different than maybe a standard tomato that is sold on the market today. So we got Cherokee Purple. It's a beautiful medium to large size fruit, purple tomato with green shoulders. We've got a Constelluto Genovese. This is a classic Italian heirloom. It's a large saucer shaped red tomato with ribs in it, deep ribs. We've got a chocolate cherry. We've got Berkeley tie-dye, green zebra I mentioned earlier, Black Prince Chadwick cherry. That's a personal favorite that we grow a lot of. Hawaiian pineapple, striped Roman, black crim, and the pink brandywine. Again, there are so many other varieties out there, but all of these varieties have done extremely good for me in the greenhouse and in an aquaponics system. Okay, for greenhouse varieties, these are not specifically heirloom varieties, we've had great luck with the following. We've got Trust, Geronimo, Rebelski, Claremont, Sakura, Marnero, Cacao, Pisano, and Marigold. Now a lot of these are from Johnny's, and every now and then they will drop one of these and come out with a new variety and rename it, and that's usually how you get these different names. So if I believe these are all still available, but let's say 5 years from now you go back and you look up Claremont and you can't find it, there's probably going to be a replacement. They've bred it to be better and they'll give it a new name, whoever did that. Okay, but these are great and these are going to be expensive. I grew Cacao last year, beautiful, small, brownish to purple tomato with green shoulders. It did extremely well for us, but the seeds were really expensive. I want to say they were over $1 a piece. So just be prepared for that. If it's a good producer, it's probably going to be a fairly expensive seed, but don't just buy it to play around with. Buy it when you're ready to produce. Play around with some cheaper seeds if you're just working on grafting or working on germination or something like that to kind of further your skill set. Okay, some beautiful tomatoes here. So we'll talk about the aquaponics system type that I would recommend that we grow tomatoes in. And as we know, we've talked about earlier, you can probably grow tomatoes in any system out there. We could probably grow it even in an NFT system to a large scale if we really heavily monitored that system. But that's not what we're going to do. Okay, we want to grow kind of the least risky and the most productive type systems. That's what we want to grow the tomato plants in. And for that, I would say, one, deep water culture. As you've all seen, I do all my stuff in deep water culture for the most part. Done a lot of tomatoes in deep water culture, and they produce very well. So I would recommend that, number one. Second, Dutch buckets, which is one of pretty much an industry standard in the commercial tomato industry, is they would use Dutch buckets or rockwool or coconut fiber slabs. Those are really the two technologies that you see most widely used throughout the world. And then we also have ebb and flow, so a flood and drain system, which will also grow tomato plants. You really need to get that low to the ground though, because if you make something at waist level, you're gonna need that much more room up top. So instead of a 10-foot overhead cable, you might need it at 14 feet. And then all of a sudden you need a scissor lift or to be on the top of a commercial ladder to do work up there. So keep that in mind. Pruning. Well, first off, we're gonna prune off all of the leaves below the lowest fruit cluster. All right, now this is once the tomato starts growing and getting mature. And I would say maybe start pruning when the plant is about 3 feet tall, the leaves at least. When it's about 3 feet tall, you're going to start to see fruiting clusters, and you're going to basically want to remove the leaves that are nearest to the ground because you're going to have a higher humidity level down there and a greater chance of them to catch a mildew or some type of mold and for that to start affecting the plant. So we want to remove those bottom leaves. But the key is you don't want the plant to be 6 inches tall, shoot out one flower stalk, and then you trim up everything on the side of the plant, okay? This is when the plant is maturing. To begin, we don't want to trim off any of the side leaves. So that's not on there, but I would put 3 feet tall for the plant is about a good time to start looking at starting to trim up the lateral leaf growth. We're going to prune off all dead leaves and leaves where more than 50% of the surface is dead. So if you have some incident with nutrients, or an incident where maybe you are spraying pesticides and you burnt the plant, well, if you burn more than 50% of the leaf, just go ahead and take it off of there. We want to prune off all of the axial branches, which are known as the suckers on a tomato plant, okay? So we have a main stalk. Let's picture my arm here as the main stalk of the tomato plant going up. And then you have a leaf coming out horizontally. Right at that axial junction, you will get a small shoot that pops up. And that shoot is basically another head of the tomato plant. It will start growing another lead out of it, and we don't want that. We're training all these to a single lead up a piece of twine to an overhead cable. So we don't want two heads, or that messes up our entire training scheme. Now, if we're growing determinate tomato plants, we don't trim off any of these axial branches, maybe a few to open it up a little, but we want that growth to grow to form a bush. That's how we're going to get a bush growth out of it. So as those axial branches grow, they elongate, and you have your main stalks with side axial growth, and it kind of lays down and bushes out. But we're kind of specifically talking more about indeterminate plants throughout the rest of this session. So we prune off all of those axial branches. We don't want them pulling energy or sucking energy from that top branch. And if you leave them on there, they will. You'll see that they can grow extremely fast. You may see one that's 2 inches one day, the next day it could be 4 to 5 inches. So they have extremely fast growth, and you want to go ahead and remove those. Never prune more than 20% of the plant mass in a single day. So don't go through the plant when it's 3 feet tall and say, okay, now it's time to trim up the leaves, and hack up more than 20% of the plant. Because the plant has to heal those wounds, and it will be losing so much moisture that you could open it up for some long-term permanent damage. Some fruit clusters may require pruning depending on the desired fruit size. So a lot of cluster tomatoes, where you see them at the grocery store and they have 8 tomatoes on a cluster, most of those are trimmed at 8 tomatoes. The cluster will continue, more flowers will set, and fruit will also develop longer than that. But that's not what the market calls for. The market wants 6 to 8 tomatoes on a cluster vine on the shelf. As more flowers develop, the beginning tomatoes will actually be smaller because less energy is put into their development and more is put into the development of the smaller fruit on that same fruit cluster, okay? Also, in cherry tomatoes, when you get extremely long fruit clusters, it can be undesirable to the point where the top of the fruit cluster has ripened, the bottom of the fruit cluster is still setting fruit, and you have lowered the vine enough to where it's time to remove that fruit cluster so it's not laying on the ground. Well, you can't remove it if it's still full of green fruit and tiny fruit that are still setting. So you need to learn a point with a lot of the tomatoes that you grow, and it's very easy after the first set of fruit sets. Let the plant, let it set and mature, unless you already know to trim it. Let the plant grow all the way to the top, and when it's time to lower the plant, if that fruit cluster is going to be on the ground, then start to remove extra fruit on the clusters above that so that they ripen quicker. And you'll quickly figure out a happy point as to how many fruit you can ripen within the vertical distance that you've got for that vine. So I hope that kind of makes sense. And again, if you've seen any of my clusters of cherry tomatoes, many of those require pruning because some of these varieties will just keep fruiting and fruiting. You could probably get 500 tomatoes, little small cherry tomatoes, in one cluster if you were to just hang the cluster up, let the vine go horizontal, and just let it fully mature and grow, because it seems like they don't stop setting flowers and fruiting. So the spacing is going to depend on a variety of things. First off, the variety that you're growing. If you grow a big tomato, big fruit, it's going to have big leaves on the plant itself, and the plant's going to take up a little bit more space. If you've got something like a cherry tomato plant, the leaves on the plant itself are smaller, they're skinnier, and the fruit itself is smaller. Okay, so you can plant those a little bit more dense. It also depends on how many leads you allow to grow. If you're gonna do multiple leads on a variety, which you can do that, but that's not what I'm teaching, and I wouldn't suggest doing that, because one root, two plants, you got a higher risk there. You're doubling your risk that if anything happens to the root portion, that you're gonna kill off two plants at once. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Smaller varieties like cherry tomatoes, currants, etc., you can actually space those 18 inches apart when you're going down the spacing in the greenhouse or in your raft, in your buckets, whatever you're using. For larger varieties, we want a spacing of 24 inches apart with high airflow and intensive production. Okay, so most of these things, when we're going to grow this in a structure, you want to get as much as you can in there because we want to pull as much money out of that controlled environment as we can. And to get a lot of plants in that small area, we're going to need good airflow to get the intensive production that we're looking for. 4 square feet per plant minimum is really what the industry has put out there as a standard for tomatoes. But again, if you've got some of these smaller specialty varieties, you can plant a little bit more dense. They should tell you right on the package how close to plant the plants, right on your seed package. So it's not a lot of guesswork. The seed company will tell you. So we want to start the seeds in either rock wool or cocoa fiber starter cube. Okay, that's my preference. Personally, you can start them in whatever you want. All right, there's a lot of starter medias out there, but these are what I would suggest to start out. If you're going for organic certification, a coconut fiber starter cube. If you're not going for organic certification, a rock wool starter cube works great. So they take 3 to 7 days for germination, and that's typical with good seed. Of course, if you got old seed, something like that, you may get one that pops up after 2 to 3 weeks. But a typical good time frame with good, healthy, strong seed is 3 to 7 days. If you have low germination, you can also start seeds in a damp paper towel. So you dampen a paper towel, wring out any water, place the seeds in the middle, fold it up and place it in between, say, 2 plates and put it in a cabinet. You check this every day and keep it damp. You unfold it and look. As soon as a taproot has popped out of the seed coating, you place that seed into your starter media. So this is way more labor intensive, but if you've got old seed, but you really want to grow some of those plants, maybe only 1/3 of them are going to hatch and you don't want to, or going to germinate, and you don't want to waste the starter media, well, sprout them in a paper towel, let all the ones that don't hatch just throw them away, and then all the ones that do, place them right into starter media. And full sun, okay, you want to put these out into full sun, so you don't want them baking in the sun. You want them to be outside though, in the environment that they're going to grow in. And why do I say that? Well, you can start them indoors, you can start them in a lot of protective areas, but if you don't get them outside exactly when they germinate, then they're going to stretch for light. And you don't want that because that immediately leads to a weak stalk on a tomato plant, and it's going to set you back for your entire run. Right from the beginning on these expensive seeds that you just invested in. So don't do that. Place them outdoors. You can put them under a 50% shade cloth outdoors if you're in a really high heat environment where you're going to lose a lot of water through that media, and maybe you're concerned that by you're going to lose a lot of water through that media, and maybe you're concerned that your plants are going to dry out. Well, then you can put 50% shade cloth over them outside. But the point is, as soon as they germinate and come out, they're going to see that sun, and they're going to halt their vertical rise, and they're going to start to bulk up. And that's what we want in these tomato seeds, okay? I've sprouted them a lot of different ways, indoors, under lights, in a paper towel, outside. You will always get stronger and more robust plants if you can get them in that natural environment to begin with. And that's it for this session. Again, if you have any questions at all, please email me, ryan@collegeofaquaponics.com, and I will be sure to cover those questions in our weekly question and answer session and make sure you get all the information that you need. Thank you very much.